it's almost a coin flip that we get that game, Ohio State and Penn State, as number 1 versus number 2 on November 2nd in Happy Valley. College football has never been better. Interest has never been higher. I believe that we are at the dawn of the golden age of college football. It was an epic day of college football. It was one of those days where you fall in love with the sport all over again. Hey, welcome into the program, everybody. This is the Joel Klatt Show. I am Joel Klatt, and this show, as always, is presented by Hampton by Hilton. We've got a great midweek show for you here as we kind of barrel into October. A lot going on in college football, in particular on the heels of that incredible weekend of upsets that we saw last Saturday. Okay, hey, before we get started, wherever you like to social media, make sure to go follow us at Joel Klatt Show. I'm on Twitter at Joel Klatt if you want to follow me personally. And then for the show, wherever you're listening, make sure to rate and review us. Please invite a friend. That would always make our day. And then if you're watching on YouTube, and even if you're not watching on YouTube, get over there, subscribe to the channel. Make sure to like the video and leave a comment below. I'll try to jump in to those comments and have a little dialogue with you. In particular, after today's episode, because I'm going to set the table for some wild things that could be happening over the next 6 or 7 weeks. I don't know. Listen, don't shoot the messenger. Get in the comments. We'll have a little discussion down there, okay? Because what I'm about to propose in today's show is wild, but possible. That's right. We're going to play a little game today on this episode of the program that is called Wild but Possible. If we thought last Saturday was wild, but then ultimately possible because all of those outcomes actually happened, like Vanderbilt beating the number 1 team in the country named Alabama, then guess what? All of these things that I'm going to bring up to you are plausible. And if you say them out loud, you think to yourself like, wait, that can't really happen, right? And certainly if you say them and you think to yourself, imagine saying these before the season, you would dismiss them as absolutely cuckoo stuff. But guess what? Possible. They're absolutely possible. And in some of these cases, maybe even likely, which is wild. I have got 6 events in this college football season that could be coming up in the next few weeks that could absolutely happen, and they are wild. Let me get started with number 1. Okay. What if I told you that Boise State gets a first-round bye in the college football playoff? Sounds wild, right? But it's possible. Let's just dive into how this might happen for Boise State. First and foremost, Boise has got to run the table, okay? And they would keep climbing the polls. Right now, they're currently number 17 in the AP. We'll see what they are when we actually get the playoff rankings and what what the committee thinks of Boise State, in particular with their lone loss to this point, and I would argue could be the lone loss in the season being at Oregon. Like if Oregon beats Ohio State all of a sudden, and if Oregon runs the table, then we're going to be thinking about Boise State in a much different light based on that game in the second week of the year. Their toughest games from this point on at UNLV on a Friday night. They're home against Oregon State in the season finale, and then they would get a Mountain West championship game, plausibly against that UNLV team. So those aren't easy games, and it's not going to be easy for them to run the table, but it's certainly plausible, and in particular with their great back, Ashton Jeanty. More on him coming up later in the show. What else would need to happen, though, for them to get a bye in the college football playoff? That would mean that they're one of the 4 best champions. Okay, so if you don't know how the byes happen and the top 4 seeds happen in the college football playoff, the top 4 champions, that means of the Power 4 conferences and the group of 5, the top-ranked 4 champions get the top 4 seeds, and each one of those teams get a bye to the second round of the playoffs. So what needs to happen? 1, Boise State runs the table. Number 2, I think an upset in the Big 12 championship game and or the Big 12 just continues to kind of eat itself. That's what's been going on so far in the early half of this season. And if that continues, then there's a strong likelihood that the eventual Big 12 champion might have multiple losses. At that point, with Boise State running the table, they would likely be ranked ahead of the Big 12 champion, thus getting one of the 4 seeds and an eventual bye. There's also this scenario out there, like, what if the ACC championship is like number, I don't know, like 19 Clemson, because let's say they stubbed their toe at some point before the ACC championship game, and then they go in and they beat like a number 9 Miami. Well, if Boise State is sitting at, say, example, like 12, 11, or 10, they would likely be ranked ahead of that Clemson team if they were to stub their toe. So lo and behold, what are they? One of the 4 best champions. I think that that's all absolutely plausible, right? It's also not out of the question that even if they miss out on the automatic bye, that they could get the 9th through, I don't know, 11th seed. Boise's only loss, they would be at Oregon on the final play of the game when the Ducks needed 2 special teams TDs to win. You could see it. They could. I'm telling you, Boise State, that's one of those teams that at this point in the season, you'd think to yourself, like, no, a group of 5 teams not going to get one of the buys, but it's absolutely plausible. Big 12 eats itself. There's an upset in the ACC championship game, and bang, Boise State is going to be on to the second round. All right, so that's number 1. Don't worry, they get better. Number 2, wild but plausible. I got stuck in between plausible and possible there. Wild but possible. Ohio State and Penn State play as the number 1 and 2 team in the country on November 2nd. Before the year, you would have been like, no, that's crazy talk. But like, that's not really going to happen. But it's absolutely within the realm of possibility. Ohio State is currently number 2. Penn State is currently number 4 in the country. This is not a large move for each of these teams to get to 1 and 2 in the country. Here's what needs to happen. Ohio State runs the table. They would need to beat Oregon, and they would need to win at home against Nebraska. They would certainly be in the top 2 in the country. Penn State needs to beat USC on the road this weekend, then Wisconsin on the road. So a couple of roadies for Penn State before that game. If those 2 teams win those 2 games, then all it comes down to is this. Georgia beats Texas on the road at Texas, or Oklahoma beats Texas, then Texas beats Georgia in Austin. And boom, you've got a 1 versus 2 matchup. I know it doesn't seem like we don't get these. You would think like 1 versus 2 in the Big Ten. We would think it's Ohio State and Michigan, right? Or maybe even Ohio State and Oregon at the beginning of the season. But if I were to tell you at the beginning of the season, like, hey, November 2nd, Ohio State and Penn State are going to play a game of the century, 1 versus 2 in Happy Valley, you would have been like, nah, I don't know. That's kind of wild, Joel. But guess what? Absolutely possible. And in fact, that's one of those where it's like, kind of makes sense, actually. It doesn't, not a lot of upsets have to occur for this to happen. In terms of likelihood, I would rate this at like, I don't know, 48%. It's almost a coin flip that we get that game, Ohio State and Penn State, as number 1 versus number 2 on November 2nd in Happy Valley. I think that would be incredible. You think about the hype there. That would immediately be the biggest game in Penn State in decades. And that place would be on fire. On fire. I would, by the way, highly anticipate that Gus and I would be there. I'm just saying. I just think that I would highly anticipate that. By the way, even if it's not 1 versus 2, highly anticipate that. Just throwing it out. Okay, so wild but possible. Number 1, Boise State could absolutely get a bye in the college football playoff. Number 2, Ohio State and Penn State could absolutely play as the number 1 and 2 team in the country. That's not wild. Well, it is. It's wild but possible. It's not out of the realm of possibility. Number 3, okay? Some possibilities here that we would just think like, no way. What if I told you before the year that Alabama was going to beat Georgia and then miss the playoff? You'd be like, absolutely not. There's no way. And lo and behold, here we are. A week after they lose to Vanderbilt, and then you look at the rest of that schedule, and you look at some of the other schedules around the country, and it's like, hold on a second. If Alabama doesn't clean up this defense, they could absolutely get beat 2 more times. That is not an easy schedule. Imagine thinking this, last Monday, if I told you like, hey, by the way, the undefeated number one team in the country, they're actually going to miss the playoff. But look at their remaining games. Now that they've lost to Vanderbilt, it changes your perspective completely. They've got South Carolina. They've got to go to Tennessee. They've got Missouri. They've got to go to LSU. They've got to go to Oklahoma. And then they've got the Iron Bowl. With the defense being what it is, and as I suggested on Monday, it doesn't seem like that's going to get fixed anytime soon because we've seen that now for 4 straight games for Alabama. The weakness is the defense. This is a 2018 Big 12 team that's going to have to win shootouts. And guess what? When you're at Tennessee and when you're at LSU and when you're playing the Iron Bowl against Auburn, you're going to see offenses that could be competent. I'm just throwing that out there. Those two environments, Tennessee and LSU on the road, are going to be incredibly difficult. At one point, you've got to assume like Alabama doesn't have their best stuff offensively. Can they win a defensive game? Nope. Not right now, at least. Now, hopefully they get better. But if I were to tell you that they were going to miss the playoff, you start to look at that schedule and you start to think, okay, with one loss already in the bag, they would have to go through that gauntlet only losing one game because I think 3 losses would put them on the outside looking in, even with that win against Georgia. There's too many teams then that would be getting huge wins. Whichever team beat them, whether it was LSU or Tennessee, they would be in there. And then you've got whatever's going on with the Big Ten. Ohio State and Penn State might be playing the game of the century on November 2nd with a 1 versus 2. So it gets really sketchy for Alabama if they lose 2 more games. And with that schedule and with that defense, that is entirely within the realm of possibility. So it might sound wild, but that is absolutely something that could happen to Alabama, which you said that a week ago, people would have been like, what are you talking about? That is crazy talk, but here it is. This might be my favorite one. So at first I started looking at this and I was like, hold on. Look at Texas A&M's schedule. And I'm like, wait a second. The way that they just beat Missouri, they're getting tangibly better. You talk about a team that's developed, in particular on the offensive side, since week 1 when they faced Notre Dame. That was not a particularly close game against Missouri. And Missouri, I get it, was overrated, but that's still a team that was plausibly a ranked team. Now, should they have been in the top 10? No, but plausibly a ranked team. And they crushed them, outgained them 2-1. 2-1 outgained them. It's, 34-0, basically until the middle of the 4th quarter. It wasn't even close. And if they can do that to Missouri, you start looking at the rest of their schedule and you start to think to yourself like, okay, hold on a second. They're already 3-0 in SEC play. This is their remaining schedule. They've got an off week. Then they're at 1-4 Mississippi State. Then they have to play LSU. That game is at home. They've got to go to South Carolina, who's lost 2 of the last 3. They get New Mexico State, thank you, SEC schedule. They've got to go to Auburn, and then they've got the monster against Texas. Okay, so here's the wild but possible. Could Texas A&M and Texas face off in back-to-back weeks, the last game of the season, and then again in the SEC championship? Doesn't that sound crazy right now? But guess what? It's almost the most likely scenario, which is bonkers. Play this thing out, okay? So you've got Wigman, who looks healthy and can run the football. Le'Veon Moss is really good. Colin Klein, their offensive coordinator, you like what's going on. So now you just got to think to yourself, what if A&M just kind of takes care of business? That would mean a win over LSU. All the other games are absolutely wins. Mississippi State, they should win that game. South Carolina, they should win that game. New Mexico State, they should win that game. They should beat Auburn at Auburn. That leaves LSU, okay? Number 13 right now, LSU. That leaves them. A&M wins their next 5. If they can get by the Tigers, then all of a sudden they get to the Texas game with only 1 loss, and they would be undefeated in SEC play. So what else has to happen for this to happen? Well, here's the kicker. They don't even have to beat Texas at that point to get into the SEC championship game. Okay, so they don't even have to go undefeated from this point on. Remember, their lone loss is Notre Dame. That's not an SEC loss. So A&M is set up in a great position. They've got basically 2 tough games left on their schedule. Both of them are at home, as LSU is coming to College Station and Texas is coming to College Station. And they don't even have to beat the Longhorns in order to get to Atlanta and play for an SEC title. Here's how that happens, okay? Here's how that could work out. A&M beats LSU, which gives them the tiebreaker over LSU. Texas beats Georgia. By the way, that game is in Austin. That would be Georgia's second loss in SEC play. Then Georgia beats Tennessee. Okay, that would be their second loss, Tennessee's. Georgia beats Ole Miss. That would be their second loss. And then you need Bama to lose 1 game somewhere, which I just told you might be a likelihood because they've got to take that defense and they've got to go to Tennessee. They've got to go to LSU. They've got to go to OU. They've got to face Missouri. They've got to face Auburn in the Iron Bowl. And then that's it. That's it. Those things happen, which are totally plausible. You're telling me like you need Texas to beat Georgia at home. Okay, I could see that happening. You need Georgia to beat Tennessee and Ole Miss. I can absolutely see that happening. And I can see Alabama losing 1 other game. And guess what? You get a situation where as SEC undefeateds, Texas faces Texas A&M in College Station on the last week of the regular season. And then the very next week, we play it again. So after 13 years of not seeing this game, you're telling me that there is a plausible scenario that we get it in back-to-back weeks and I say, aha, where's the spoon? It could absolutely happen. And in fact, if you're telling me outside of the SEC championship game, if you're asking me, like, is there a team that is not on the radar right now that you would put money on to go to the college football playoff? It would be Texas A&M. Because of the schedule that we just looked at. They're 3-0 already in the SEC. They're playing much better, and they've got Mississippi State, LSU, South Carolina, New Mexico State, Auburn, and Texas. Manageable. That's manageable. They don't even have to beat Texas to go. They don't even have to beat Texas to go to the SEC championship game. I painted that scenario. They don't even have to beat Texas, and even if they didn't go to the SEC championship game, guess what? A team that goes 7-1 in SEC play is going to the college football playoff, even if they don't go to Atlanta. So you're talking about like it's real for Texas A&M. In Mike Elko's first year there, the way that they played against Missouri tells me that they're going to have a great shot even against LSU because that game is at home. None of the other games scare me all that much. And then all of a sudden you're in whether you beat Texas or not. That is wild. If we go back to the first week of the regular season and we watched Notre Dame beat them and we kind of wrote them off and it didn't look good and it's like, hey, A&M is what they've always been. But what if they're not? What if they're not? Wild but possible. Texas and Texas A&M playing back-to-back weeks, the last week of the regular season and in the SEC championship game. That would be incredible. Incredible. Like I said, it's not crazy. Totally within the realm of possibility. All right, next one. All right, wild but possible. I love this one as well because when I say it, you're going to be like, no way. Indiana and Ohio State meet on November 23rd, next to the last game of the regular season. Both as undefeateds. Wild, right? Yep. I get it. And guess what? What if I told you that Indiana at this point would be favored to win every game up until that juncture? Rourke has been great. I've watched their film. They can run it. Their offensive line is much better. Cignetti has infused them with great confidence. They've got a good core of wide receivers. And every game they play from now until November 23rd, they will be favored in. They're 6-0, folks. They were picked to finish 17th in the preseason Big Ten media poll, ahead of Purdue. Ahead of Purdue. And here they are at 6-0. They will be favored in every game up until Ohio State. They've got a quality quarterback, great confidence, really good wide receiver core. And the kicker is that the offensive line is actually playing really well because they can run it. Love Ellison. They're back. This team is real. We're about to see them a few times here in the next month, I would guess, because they're going to be playing some of the most meaningful games over the next few weeks. Indiana wins their next 4, 3 of which are at home. They're off this week, and guess what? They're going to be undefeated. So now all you need is Ohio State to hold up their end of the bargain, which is actually much more difficult because Ohio State has to go on the road twice, both to top 4 opponents, or at least top 4 right now, Oregon and Penn State. That's a lot more difficult than these 4 games, which you're seeing on YouTube. Here's Indiana's next 4. Nebraska, that's at home. Washington, that's at home. Michigan State on the road, and Michigan at home. And I'm telling you right now, today they would be favored in every one of those games. And it's not a fluke. If you go watch their film, this team is actually really good. They're not going away. Now, I'm not saying that they won't stub their toe because guess what? We talk about teams all the time and about ceilings and floors and what they're going to and favored and not favored. And guess what? If they don't play well, they'll get beat. And if Washington plays well, they can beat them. And if Nebraska plays well, they can beat them. So this by no stretch is a foregone conclusion. But there is a plausible scenario where if chalk happens and Ohio State wins all the games that they're favored in and Indiana wins all the games that they're favored in, Vegas would tell you that they're going to meet November 23rd as undefeateds, 10-0 and 10-0. Like, what if I were to tell you that the most important game, maybe not most important, but as far as for a Big Ten championship, we might get Indiana, Ohio State on November 23rd and again in the championship game. It sounds wild, and yet I'm telling you, they're favored in every one of these games. This is turning into such a good college football season because we've got things that would never get on the radar that is starting to happen. With the transfer portal, with NIL, you're seeing teams that can reboot in a hurry. We've seen that now with Colorado. We saw it with Washington. We saw it with TCU. You get a veteran group of guys. Now we're seeing it with Indiana. I'm here for it, man. Curt Cignetti has done an incredible job, and there is a plausible scenario where Ohio State and Indiana play both 10-0 on November 23rd. That would be crazy. So that would mean that Ohio State, in theory, if these things start to happen, play this week against an undefeated Oregon on the road. Then they would have to face an undefeated in a 1-2 matchup, Penn State on the road. Then they've got to face an undefeated Indiana team. And all of a sudden, it's Ohio State that would have the most difficult schedule in the country, which is crazy. It's crazy. I love college football so much. I love college football so much. All right, I've got another one here. Wild but possible. What if I were to tell you before the season that a group of 5 players is going to win the Heisman Trophy? What would you say? What would you say? You'd be like, no way. That's not going to happen. No way. And guess what? Totally possible because Ashton Jeanty is now the betting favorite to win the Heisman Trophy. He's averaging 206 rushing yards per game. He's got 16 touchdowns in 5 games. Staggering. That is a staggering amount. And oh, by the way, he's running it for almost 11 yards per carry. Which, I mean, like, it's insane. Have you guys watched him at all? Please go watch Ashton Jeanty. It is an absolute joy. He runs with power. He's ferocious. He's fast. He's got great balance. He did it against Oregon. He's been doing it against everybody. 206 per game. 16 tugs. I mean, Deuce is running loose, man. This guy is everything that you want. He is an NFL back through and through. And at this point, like, again, odds-on favorite to win the Heisman Trophy. Now, he's currently on pace to break Barry Sanders' record, single-season record. That happened in 1988. If you don't know what that record is, it's ridiculous. Barry ran for 2,628 yards in 11 games. That's bonkers, by the way. Absolutely wild. Genty's pace is right now 2,681. Granted, that would happen in 13 games. I do believe that he has to not only come close, but maybe even beat Barry's record, which he's on pace to do, granted through 13 when Barry did it in 11. He's got to do something that's like historically special, I think, for a lot of voters to get over the fact that he's doing it against a group of 5 schedule. And to be honest, I think that that's fair. Okay. But he is doing something historic right now. And this guy is, I mean, he's incredible. He definitely has to pass up. Melvin Gordon ran for like 2,500 yards a few years ago, did not win the Heisman Trophy. That was when Marcus Mariota won the Heisman Trophy. I would have a hard time giving Ashton Genty the Heisman unless he at least outrushed Melvin Gordon, and candidly probably needs to outrush Barry Sanders, who did that in 11 games, in order for me to get over this kind of group of 5 schedule. I get it. He played against Oregon, but he's not playing against Oregon every single week. I'm not trying to diminish because, like I said, the guy is fabulous. I love watching him. He's one of my favorite players to watch. His speed, balance, vision, all of it. It is so good. He's a Sunday player. There's no doubt about it. So let's get to my Heisman list. Rather than me just sit here and wax on about this, let's get to my Heisman list. He wouldn't be my favorite. I'll go 5-1 here. Number 5 on my Heisman list right now is Jeremiah Smith, the wide receiver from Ohio State. If you haven't watched Jeremiah Smith, you got to go watch him. He's an absolute show. I love this guy. He is, of all the wide receivers that have come through Ohio State to this point, he is right now on pace to, I think, be the best of them all. He is, you cannot cover him with one player, and he's a true freshman. And by the way, it's over and above true freshman. Yeah, it's an amazing, feat for a true freshman. You watch the catches that he makes. He is indefensible. You cannot defend this guy. And I like absolute show. One-handed grabs every single week. He's got 7 touchdowns now in 5 games. All due respect to Ryan Williams, who's also a fabulous player. I think Jeremiah Smith is just physically more imposing. And so that's why he's number 5 for me. My number 4 guy on my Heisman list currently is Jalen Milroe. I know that they lost, but like some of those Oklahoma quarterbacks of, the late teens in 2017, 18, 19, like he's going to have incredible numbers. And now you understand the pressure that he's under in order to produce, because they have a defense that cannot defend. So whether it's his production on the ground, running the football, or his production through the air, throwing the football, he's going to be relied upon to a level that maybe others aren't at that position, in particular those that play for a really good team. He's got 311 total yards per game, 20 total touchdowns. That's second in college football. He's going to have to keep winning shootouts, and so that's why he's absolutely in there. Number 3 is Cam Ward. He's been rock solid and unbelievable so far. He's the only reason that they won the last 2 games. His performance against Cal was incredible. He leads the country in passing and touchdowns and has led 2 big comebacks. He's got Virginia Tech, that comeback. He's got the Cal comeback. The last 2 games, Miami has 2 losses if they don't have him. So Cam Ward is kind of a clear number 3. Another 400 yards last week against Cal. And when you watch him, it just pops off the tape. You're like, oh yeah. That guy's not only the best quarterback in the conference, he may be the best quarterback in the country. And he's right now my number 1 quarterback on a Heisman list, because these next 2 guys actually don't play the position, which is wild. I've got 5 on my Heisman list and only 2 are quarterbacks. At number 2, if I had to vote for this today, it would be Ashton Genty, the running back for Boise. I think Ashton Genty is a phenomenal player. I love watching him play. There is a burning question in the back of my mind just about, like, are there any other players in the country that could be doing what he's doing or close to it with that schedule? And even if you say like, no one could do what he's doing, you're like, okay, but there's that pause. Meanwhile, the guy who's number 1 on my Heisman list, there's no question about that. because of the unique nature in which he plays. My number one Heisman contender right now, Travis Hunter from Colorado. Travis Hunter is doing things that we've never seen in the history of the sport. And it's because of the unique nature of what he's doing that he's number one. Of the traditional contenders, Genty's clearly the top contender of the guys playing the game in a traditional manner. But right now we have this unicorn. We have this incredible athlete that is the best player on both sides of the ball, which is a staggering thought. The way he's producing at wide receiver, he's third in college football in catches. He's got 2 picks while playing 132 snaps per game. Now, there's a chance that his production continues to go down as he possibly gets a little bit fatigued in the back half of the season. Maybe he doesn't produce as a wide receiver as much, or maybe his threat as a corner in terms of creating some of those turnovers, they're not going to target him as much and his production goes down on the defensive side. But his impact on the game is so unique. It is not traditional at all. So I don't want to take anything away from Ashton Genty. If this was a traditional list, he would be number one, of course. But we're in this season where we've got this unicorn out here doing things that we've never seen in the history of the sport. And for those reasons, I still have Travis Hunter as number one. Now, if his production goes down or his impact goes down, him playing both ways is not enough for me to vote for him for the Heisman. But right now, the production is there. You could argue that he's in the running to be the Biletnikoff Award winner. He's also in the running to be the Thorpe Award winner. That's the top wide receiver and top defensive back in the country. That's insane. That's totally insane. So I'm leaving myself a little bit of room. I've got something that's never happening before, and I've got a guy that is breaking records or could break records from a traditional sense at number 2. So in that sense, it's an incredible year for the Heisman Trophy. Okay, that's going to end it for Wild But True, but I do want to share with you a couple of thoughts because since Monday's show, the news about the House settlement kind of came out, and you might be glazing over and you're thinking to yourself, like, I don't want to hear a bunch of legal jargon. And you know what? That's fine. I just want to give you guys a quick overview of where we're at right now in the structure of college football and why this news this week was important. So a judge granted an approval to the settlement in the House versus the NCAA case. That would permit schools to directly share revenue with athletes. And you might be thinking to yourself, like, didn't that already happen? Yes. What happened is that the judge in this case granted the approval to continue because they actually delivered a bit of a framework for the judge. And the judge said, okay, like this is plausible, wild, but possible. So continue down the road. Let's back up for a moment and just let me give you an overarching statement about why this is so important right now. Okay. Rather than getting into all the nitty gritty and trying to deliver all the details, this is why it's important, is because if you take nothing else away from this, this is the most significant event since NIL and the transfer portal opened up in their beginning. So ever since that moment, the pendulum, in terms of the autonomy for the player and the power that the player has been swinging all towards the player. And this is the first moment that we're starting to get kind of a glimmer. And candidly, it swung past equilibrium or the bottom of the pendulum and it swung too far towards the player. I think we all can acknowledge that. Their autonomy is probably a little too great. Being able to transfer whenever you want is, something that is probably not great. The NIL process right now, pay for play and inducements, probably not great for the sport. So they're starting to, this is the first light at the end of the tunnel that starts to take that pendulum and just starts to tick it back towards the middle just a little bit. Now, this is not going to remove rights from players, but what it is going to start to do is put some guardrails around those things, namely NIL. And here's how it does it. Two things that this House settlement is trying to do. Number one, it's making sure that players are going to get a revenue distribution from the television contracts. That's going to happen. We all know that that's going to happen. The second thing that this is trying to do is provide some guardrails in order to root out the pay for play or inducements that's going on currently in NIL. And now, listen, will this be able to do that? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. It's certainly not an ironclad deal. part of the issue is that every state still has their own laws for NIL. So until there's a blanket of federal legislation over name, image, and likeness, it's going to be very difficult for any entity, whether it's the NCAA or any conference, to try to govern all of their schools if all of their schools are in different states. That's basically all you need to know right now, is that this is starting to start the process of forming guardrails. And will it achieve that? Probably not, without some more help, in particular from federal legislation. So that's where we're at with the House settlement. Can't wait for tomorrow because we've got incredible games to preview. This is one of the great slates of college football that we're going to have in a long time. We've got insane games. I'll be breaking them down tomorrow, including giving you picks. And oh, by the way, there was a nice, tidy little 5-0 last week with the picks. So Joel Klatt Show is on a bit of a heater right now. We're 21-11. We're 9-1 in our last 10. And you're going to have to watch the preview episode tomorrow to get our picks for what will become, I think, the best college football that we have had so far this year. Follow us on social media at Joel Klatt Show. Subscribe to the show on YouTube. Like the video, comment below, rate and review us wherever you're listening to this podcast. Have a blessed day, and we'll be with you tomorrow with some previews.